to get them right. Madam President, I appreciate greatly your time on the floor this afternoon. It's wonderful to see you. And at this point, I yield the floor. I also note the absence of a quorum.
I think Senator from Missouri is here. Senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to just briefly rise and make some comments about the people at home that I'm so proud of. Over the past 3 weeks, my home state has been the site of heartbreaking destruction that resulted from a series of severe weather incidents throughout the state. We have also had the privilege of witnessing great acts of bravery, compassion, and neighbors being neighbors in response to these incidents. I wanted to take just a moment today to recognize the incredible character of Missourians, and particularly to recognize the contributions made by the citizen soldiers and airmen of the Missouri National Guard. Today, weeks after this historic flooding began, we continue to see its life-altering effects in my state and others all along the Mississippi River. My prayers and those of my colleagues go out to all who have and will continue to have their lives altered by this tragedy. I'll continue to work with my colleagues in the Missouri delegation to make sure that the federal government provides the assistance necessary to help Missourians affected by the tragedy so that they can get back on their feet and back at their important work. Already the President has granted the first federal disaster assistance to individuals and households across the state. More announcements will come as damage assessments are completed. The USDA is also poised to assist and will start holding public meetings in the affected areas to inform farmers and landowners of the help that they can receive. One thing that struck me about the response to the storms has been the dignity and class with which Missourians have carried themselves. In my state, families have been driven from their homes, pushed away from their jobs, taken off their land, lost everything. Whether it's a family in North St. Louis whose home was destroyed by a tornado, or a producer whose family farm was submerged when the levee protecting it was intentionally breached, Missourians have drawn on their faith, their families, and their neighbors to pull through. I had the opportunity to spend some time with some of these families during my trip to view some of the flooding in southeast Missouri. Their courage, as always, is inspiring as an example of the American spirit that we all hold dear. We have had a rough year. The last 3 weeks have been particularly destructive, starting with a tornado and strong winds that ripped through the St. Louis area on Good Friday. This tornado, rated an EF4, was estimated to be the strongest to hit the area in nearly 4 decades. As the tornado and storms battered the St. Louis area, rain continued to fall in southeast and southern Missouri. And when Governor Jay Nixon made the decision to deploy the Missouri National Guard to assist local emergency responders, it marked the 20th time in the last 6 years that the Missouri National Guard has provided such assistance, including the last time that catastrophic flood struck the state in 2008. Since their deployment to respond to this latest disaster, the Missouri National Guard, under the very strong leadership of my friend, their Adjutant General, Major General Stephen Danner, has provided invaluable support to the governor, the Army Corps of Engineers, local responders, and citizens across scores of communities that have suffered damage. 2 events from recent days provide a perfect summary of the service that these brave men and women continue to perform for the people of my state. Last week, the citizen soldiers and airmen of the Missouri National Guard joined the people of Caruthersville in Penobscot County to rapidly erect a secondary flood wall to support the existing wall. This new effort, made of 60,000 sandbags stretched across over 3,000 feet, helped to provide safety and peace of mind for a community that was racked with fear and thought the worst could happen. A couple of counties away, the Missouri National Guard members helped to save a 93-year-old woman trapped in her car as she tried to cross a flooded Black River. One of the guardsmen on the scene, seeing his first emergency duty, remarked, "We aren't here to be heroes, we're just doing our jobs." The citizen soldiers and airmen of the Missouri National Guard, who are just doing their jobs, have played an incredibly important role in supporting the flood response efforts of their neighborhoods. A member of the 138th Military Police Company said it best when he said, "Nothing makes you feel as good as being able to help your neighbors in Missouri. The Missouri National Guard and the people they valiantly serve are and will continue to be the embodiment of those words and the spirit that we all strive to personify. I thank them for their bravery, I thank them for their selflessness, and I thank them for just being great neighbors. And we will all stand by to be of assistance as everyone recovers from the natural disasters that have brought such destruction to the state that I love. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
The senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Madam President, I rise this afternoon to discuss an important piece of bipartisan legislation that I am introducing today with my friend and fellow New Englander, Senator Olympia Snowe, to establish a national endowment for the study, conservation, and restoration of our nation's oceans, coasts, and Great Lakes. Let me begin with a particular thank you to our original co-sponsors, the chairman of the Commerce Committee, Senator Rockefeller of West Virginia, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Inouye of Hawaii, my colleague from the great state of Michigan, Senator Stabenow, and two colleagues from the Gulf of Mexico region, Senator Bill Nelson of Florida and Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana. As any Rhode Islander can tell you, the ocean is central to our state's way of life. I tell colleagues here that Rhode Island's coast is one of the most beautiful places on earth. But we don't call Rhode Island the ocean state just because it is beautiful. We are the ocean state because from our earliest days, we have relied on the ocean and our beloved Narragansett Bay for trade, for food, for recreation, and for jobs. Jobs in the shipbuilding, shipping, fishing, and tourism industries. And we are not alone. Across America, our oceans and coasts directly provide over $130 billion to our country's gross domestic product and support 2.3 million American jobs. But the impact goes far beyond that. Our coastal zone areas generate nearly half of our nation's gross domestic product and support more than 28 million jobs. In part, Madam President, it is Americans' love of and reliance on the oceans that drives the need now to protect and restore them. Coastal America is experiencing a huge population boom, leading to more and more construction that puts significant pressure on our natural coastline and on our wetlands. Worldwide, demand for seafood grows at a pace that our fish stocks cannot keep pace with. And our demand for energy leads us ever deeper into the ocean in search of fuel. There is an old adage that nothing focuses the mind like a crisis. Well, if this is true, it must be time to focus on taking care of our oceans. Because, Madam President, our oceans are facing what can only be characterized as a crisis. Our oceans are facing an array of threats, from marine debris aggregating in gyres the size of Texas to whales so full of bioaccumulative toxins that they constitute swimming, living, hazardous waste. Mr. President, Madam President, these are just a few of the headlines from the past year. This spring, we've watched in horror as Japan, already suffering from a terrible earthquake and tsunami, battled to keep the Fukushima nuclear plant intact. Leaks from the plant have sent harmful levels of radiation into the Pacific Ocean. In July of 2010, the Midwest experienced its largest oil spill ever after a leaking Michigan pipeline poured oil into the Kalamazoo River and thence into the Great Lakes. Last June, the journal Science published a literature review by researchers from the University of Queensland and UNC Chapel Hill, revealing mounting evidence that, and I quote, rapidly rising greenhouse gas concentrations are driving ocean systems toward conditions not seen for millions of years, with an associated risk of fundamental and irreversible ecological transformation. In my home state of Rhode Island, the Narragansett Bay has witnessed a 4-degree increase in average annual winter water temperature, causing what amounts to a full ecosystem shift. And of course, in April 2010, we witnessed the horrific explosion of the Deepwater Horizon, the tragic loss of life, and the unfolding of the largest environmental disaster our country has ever seen. The Gulf of Mexico and the people who depend on this ecosystem for their sustenance and their livelihoods are still struggling to recover. We are now 13 months beyond the Deepwater Horizon explosion. Lives are still shattered. Livelihoods reliant on the Gulf ecosystem are still threatened. But we are within the window of action. It is not too late to provide for short-term restoration of America's Gulf Coast, to enact legislation that reduces the risk of future oil spills, and, as my co-sponsors and I seek, to provide dedicated funding to study, protect, and restore the marine and coastal ecosystems within the United States boundaries. The National Endowment for the Oceans is our proposal to meet this last challenge. The endowment would make grants available to coastal and Great Lakes states, local government agencies, regional planning bodies, academic institutions, and nonprofit organizations. So these entities could embark on projects to learn more about and do a better job of protecting our precious natural resources. Projects that allow researchers to hire technicians, mechanics, computer scientists, and students. Projects that put people to work relocating critical public infrastructure jeopardized by sea level rise. Projects that solve resource management problems and restore our natural ecosystems. And projects that protect jobs by restoring commercial fisheries habitat and creating new fisheries gear for sustainable and profitable fishing. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration received $167 million for coastal restoration projects under the Recovery Act. More than 800 proposals for shovel-ready construction and engineering projects came in, totaling $3 billion worth of work. But NOAA could only fund 50 of the 800. The National Endowment for the Oceans would help us move forward with these projects and others that protect our oceans and drive our economy. As I stand here today, more than a year after the beginning of the oil spill in the Gulf, and in the face of mounting evidence that our oceans and coasts are truly facing a crisis, I understand the feelings of concern and frustration. But again, I believe it is not too late. In fact, I believe the time is now to pass legislation that will help to restore the Gulf ecosystem. The time is now to pass legislation that will reduce the risk of future oil spills, and it is time now to provide dedicated funding for the study, restoration, and protection of our nation's ocean and coastal resources. We need to put the stewardship of our natural resources, our ocean resources, at the forefront of our national agenda. The National Endowment for the Oceans, as I said, is bipartisan, and I thank Senator Olympia Snowe for her leadership in this effort. This legislation is science-based, with much of the money made available through a competitive grant program. This legislation is cost-effective, coordinating existing efforts of federal, local, and private programs, reducing duplication of research efforts, and crossing political borders to ensure that every dollar is spent with the greatest possible effect. Finally, this legislation is appropriately paid for, with revenue generated from the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, a portion of royalties from Outer Continental Shelf energy development, and fines and damages collected for violations of federal law off our coastline. Put simply, a small portion of the revenue we extract from our oceans and great waters will be reinvested to now protect the long-term viability of those oceans and great waters. Madam President, the ocean provides us with great bounty, and we will continue to take advantage of that as we should. We will fish, we will sail, and we will trade. We will dispose of waste. We will extract fuel and construct wind farms. Navies and cruise ships, sailboats and supertankers will plow the ocean surface. We cannot change how reliant we are on our oceans. What we can change is what we do in return. We can, for the first time, give back. We can become stewards of our oceans, not just takers, but caretakers. The oceans contain immense potential for new discoveries, immense potential for new jobs, and immense potential for new solutions to the emerging oceans crisis. But to meet the demands of this moment, we must respond to the challenges before us. We must heed the alarm bells that are ringing. From the Arctic seas to our tropic oceans, from the top of the food chain to the bottom, alarm bells indeed are ringing. I urge my colleagues to join Senator Snowe and myself in support of the National Endowment for the Oceans. Let ours be the generation that tips the increasingly troubling balance between mankind and our oceans a little bit back toward the benefit of our oceans for the long-term benefit of mankind. Madam President, I thank the Chair, and I ask unanimous consent that the time for morning business for debate only be extended until 6 p.m., with senators permitted until then to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection, so ordered.
With that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Alabama is recognized.
Madam President, I thank the Chair and just would share a few thoughts on the very important matter of the financial health of the United States. We had a nice meeting with the President earlier today. Republican senators, virtually all were there, shared their thoughts, and the President responded. And all in all, it was a good exchange. Those are the kind of meetings that I don't talk about what is said in detail or quote anyone. I was asked by a number of reporters what happened and what could you say about it. And I guess my conclusion is that not much happened, that no commitments were made that I could see that indicated that the President had made any change in the budget he had submitted or the speech he gave somewhat amending his budget a few weeks ago. He did not make any changes in the plan that I'm seeing out there. He was open, discussed it, maybe something will happen. Well, what is the status of the Senate's business? This is the Senate. The Senate has serious responsibilities. The Budget Act that was designed to ensure that Congress passes a budget, because it was learned over the years, and goes back to the 70s, that a budget is important for a country to have. Families have them, businesses have them. You need a budget. Congress was having trouble passing a budget. So they passed the Budget Act that allowed a budget to become law without 60 votes in the Senate, but they could be passed with 50 votes. Because we know there are 54 Democrats in the Senate, and more than, I guess, than that with independents that caucus with the Democrats. So this is a situation we're in. The President complied with the Budget Act a week late by submitting his budget. And his budget failed to meet the requirements of our time to a very significant degree. Every witness we've had in our Budget Committee, I'm the ranking Republican on it, has indicated and told us, many in great detail and with passion, we're on an unsustainable course. You can't continue to borrow 40 cents of every dollar and try to fund the government borrowing that kind of money, and that we will hit a budget deficit this year of $1.5 trillion, the largest in the history of America. And in 4 years, the President will have doubled the entire debt of the United States based on the trillion-dollar deficits he's had each single year. So this is not an acceptable path for us to be on. And we had hearings in the Budget Committee about the critical issues we face. We considered and had testimony from the Fiscal Commission that President Obama appointed, Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson. We had the Rivlin-Pete Domenici Commission. Senator Domenici, retired now, was budget chairman at one point in time in the Senate. Alice Rivlin, OMB director for President Clinton, and a wizard herself with numbers. And they proposed some real changes in the debt trajectory we're on. So I thought after that, and based on the comments of Senator Conrad, our chairman, and the strong witnesses that we heard that called on us to make significant changes in what we were doing, that we would move forward with a budget that would be a good bit stronger than the one President Obama submitted. Indeed, President Obama's budget was not serious. President Obama's budget took the current spending line for 10 years that the Congressional Budget Office says we're on, and it made it worse. It made the deficit worse, $2 trillion worse than the current plan we were on. Totally unacceptable. He proposed in his budget increasing education funding by 10.5%, increasing Energy Department funding 9.5%, increasing State Department funding 10.5%, and proposed increasing the Transportation Department 62%. I mean, in a time when inflation is, what, 2%? We're having those kind of increases, and we say we're submitting a budget that recognizes we're on an unsustainable course and we've got to change? Well, it was unacceptable. I was very disappointed about it, and I think even the man he appointed to head the Debt Commission, Erskine Bowles, said it was they've come nowhere close to what's necessary to avoid our fiscal nightmare. Well, so we were told by our budget chairman, Senator Conrad, who it's been a pleasure to work with, that we would have a budget markup beginning this Monday. Told us that last week. Well, it didn't happen on Monday, and then maybe it was going to be Tuesday, and maybe it was going to be Wednesday, and then all of a sudden the President invited the Democrats over Wednesday and the Republicans to the White House Thursday, and everything's off. And I asked my staff, have we received a notice that we're going to have a Budget Committee hearing next week? And the answer is no. So what do we say about that? The Budget Act says that the Senate and the House should commence budget action April 1st. Well, we've not done that. It says that a budget should be passed by April 15th. The Senate has not done that. The Republican House has. The Republican House has proposed a historic budget. They've passed it. They passed it on time. That would reduce spending by about $6 trillion. That would actually reduce taxes also and get the rates down to help encourage more economic growth and put us on a path to fiscal sanity, not only this decade, but in the decades to come, because it dealt with some of the exploding entitlement programs like Medicare. And so what resulted from that? Well, Mr. Ryan, the brilliant young congressman who's worked on budget issues for many, many years, is the most knowledgeable person probably in America about the details and the financial condition of America. They attacked him like he did something wrong. So the Democratic senators and the president are spending their time attacking the one person who stood up and produced a budget that can be defended, and he's prepared to defend it anywhere, anytime. He goes to town hall meetings. He's stood before the press. He's issued statements. He's explained what his budget is. It may not be perfect, but it's a change. It would put us on a path to financial stability. And what has the Senate done? Complained about his budget. Well, it's time this Senate produces a budget. Let me say this. 743 days today have passed since the Senate has passed a budget. Now, let me ask you, if you took a poll of the American people, how many of the American people would say the Senate shouldn't pass a budget? We've got a whole act that requires one to be passed and brought up and voted on. What happened last year? The Budget Committee did produce a budget. It came to the floor, and the Democratic leader, Senator Reid, well, he just didn't have time to bring it up. Well, why? Well, you know, there's a vote-a-rama. We don't like vote-a-rama. What's a vote-a-rama? Everybody gets to file an amendment, and senators are supposed to vote. It has to be brought up and passed. It has 50 hours. It's passed by a simple majority. Why? Because we want to accelerate the debate, make sure a budget is passed, because a nation that intends to be serious about its financial stability needs a budget, does it not? This, as I said, it began in the 70s. And so we're now beginning to wonder, well, will a committee even pass a budget? Is Senator Conrad not even going to have a committee mark up and produce a budget? Is the Democratic Senate just not even going to move one out of committee? At least it moved one out of committee last year. And if the committee does meet and does move a budget, does Senator Reid prepare to stand up like Congressman Ryan, lay his budget down before the American people and defend it before the world? Oh, well, we need to have talks. We got talks going on. The Vice President's having a meeting. The President's inviting everybody over. Why don't we move forward with our budget process, I ask? Why don't we? Well, why not? Well, you read in one of our local newspapers that covers the Senate, I think it was The Hill, that Senator Conrad had a hard time with his Democratic colleagues. His budget, which I very much was afraid wouldn't contain spending enough, but certainly I felt it would be better than the budget President Obama had submitted. was discussed with his Democratic colleagues last week in their conference, and it didn't go well, we're told. And so this week he came back again, apparently, and produced another budget. And according to the report, Senator Sanders, probably the most aggressive and articulate advocate for greater government spending and activism in the Senate, Senator Sanders seemed to be very happy that he changed the budget. And it had $2 trillion in tax increases, they said, and $2 trillion in spending reductions. That's supposed to be balanced. But that's not what the Debt Commission said. The Debt Commission, which I didn't agree with, really, they said, well, you should have at least $3 worth of spending reductions for every $1 in tax increases. And now we have another report, I think it was in the CQ publication, that does work around here and digs up information. They said, well, it looks like it's going to be less spending reductions than that. Looks like it's going to be about $2 trillion in tax increases and only $1.5 trillion in reduced spending. So it's less than even 1-to-1. Well, I think if I were the majority leader, I wouldn't really feel comfortable about bringing such a budget as that before the American people and standing right down here and defending such a weak response to the fiscal crisis that we're now in. Of course that budget is irresponsible, if that's so. And I don't think the American people will be happy with it. I certainly will oppose it with every strength in my body if that's the nature of it. Well, why don't you know, Sessions? Well, I haven't been told what's in it. We asked, the Republican members of the committee wrote the chairman and asked that any budget numbers that are produced be produced 72 hours in advance of the hearing so we can study it, offer amendments or substitute as we chose to do so. We've been basically told that you will get the budget resolution that the chairman intends to file the morning it starts. When you commence the hearing to mark up the budget, we'll be getting the copy of it, what they propose to bring forward. And we really think that that's not a healthy way to do business on a matter this important. This period in history represents the most significant long-term threat to American financial stability that we've seen maybe ever. We're sure we had a tough time during World War II and the debt went up, but you could see when the war was over and the strength of our workforce and the economy grew, we came right out of that and got that situation under control quickly. But now we're in a situation in which our nation is aging. The number of people working is down. The number of recipients is up in Medicare, Social Security. And we have to figure out a way to honestly deal with that without in any way placing our seniors at risk and other people who benefit from government programs. It's going to take some change. It's first going to take change in wasteful Washington spending. All our discretionary spending needs to be looked at aggressively, and we also are going to have to look at the long-term prospects for our financial future as our creditors, those who are loaning us this money we're borrowing, are getting uneasy, and they're not too comfortable with what we're doing. I just believe that any party, any president who desires the mantle of a leader, desires to demonstrate a commitment to a firm footing for our financial future, should come forth with a plan as part of the budget process and lay it out so the American people can see it. And I'm becoming very concerned that once again, even though 743 days have passed since a budget has cleared this Senate, that we may not get one this year. What an event. That, to me, is unthinkable. How irresponsible could we be to go another year under these circumstances? For example, the Congressional Budget Office has analyzed the President's proposal for the future, and that scoring of the President's budget concludes a couple of things. Last year, our interest that we paid on the money this nation has borrowed was $200 billion. In 10 years, under the President's plan, the Congressional Budget Office said the amount of interest that would be paid in 1 year is $940 billion. That's bigger than the Defense Department. That's bigger than Medicare. It'd be the largest single item in the entire budget. It's unthinkable. We get no benefit from that whatsoever except the money we borrowed to live off of. We're passing huge debts off to our grandchildren, and the expert economists and financiers that testified before the Budget Committee said, don't think that you can just assume that the problem falls on your grandchildren. They said we could have a crisis much sooner than that. Mr. Bowles and Mr. Simpson issued a statement to us when they testified that said we're facing the most predictable debt crisis in American history. When asked, could we have when such a crisis could hit us? And Mr. Bowles, chosen by President Obama to head the commission, said 2 years, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. Alan Simpson said, I think it could be 1 year. Well, we hope we don't have some new debt crisis. We hope that the people who have been loaning us money don't get so nervous, as they've done in Greece, that our interest rates surge, puts this economy in a dangerous condition, and damages our country. I hope that's not happening within 2 years or 1 year. Wouldn't that be a disaster for us? How do we prevent it? We take action now that changes the debt trajectory of our country, sends a message to the whole world. We get it. We know we can't continue on this path, and we're changing. And the way our Congress and government is set up, the way that change occurs is through the adoption of a budget. And, Madam President, I remain very disappointed that while the House has produced a historic budget on time, by April 15th, we now have not even begun to mark up a budget in the Senate. And that's irresponsible. And we need to know, and the American people need to know, that the majority leader, if a budget is passed out of committee, and certainly it should be, that he will move it on the floor and bring it up for vote in amendment and debate. And then it goes to the House in conference, and they hammer out the differences, and we adopt a budget that can help put this country on a sound financial path and avoid the kind of crisis that so many experts have warned us could occur. I thank the chair. I see my fabulous colleague, Senator Hatch, here, the ranking Republican member of the Finance Committee, and my former chairman on the Judiciary Committee. It was an honor to serve with him. I thank the chair and would yield the floor.
Madam President.
Thank you. The senator from Utah is recognized.
I thank my dear colleague for his kind remarks, and I appreciate them. Madam President, yesterday the Finance Committee held a hearing on the U.S.-Colombian Free Trade Agreement, what we call the Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement. Now, this agreement will provide significant new opportunities for U.S. manufacturers, agricultural producers, and service providers in the rapidly growing Colombia market. Implementation of the Colombia Agreement would also benefit U.S. national security. Colombia is emerging from decades of civil strife, and it is in our interest to see that Colombia continues to heal from its wounds of the past. This free trade agreement will help bring further stability to Colombia, a close friend and ally, while also opening and further building the market for U.S. exports to that country. In short, it is a good agreement for the United States. So what's the holdup? Over 4 years have passed since the U.S.-Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement was signed. It is imperative that the administration submits an implementing bill for this agreement to Congress, and soon. The administration, however, still won't say when it will send an implementing bill to Capitol Hill. During yesterday's hearing, I asked our Deputy U.S. Trade Representative 2 very simple questions regarding this issue. First, assuming that Colombia fulfills the steps outlined in the Labor Action Plan developed by the Obama administration, and the Colombian government will let me go over that again. Assuming, first, that Colombia fulfills the steps outlined in the Labor Action Plan developed by the Obama administration and the Colombian government, will the administration submit the Colombia Agreement to Congress for a vote? Second, is the administration preconditioning the President's formal submission of the Colombia Trade Agreement on matters not related to the Action Plan, such as congressional extension of trade adjustment assistance or permanent normal trade relations for Russia? To me, these questions are pretty clear and can be answered with a simple yes or no. But unfortunately, we did not get a clear answer. After years of delay, we still do not know if the administration will ever submit the Colombia Agreement to Congress for approval. This is very unfortunate. The Obama administration's delay in submitting the Colombia Agreement is hurting U.S. exporters. This failure is a drag on job creation and economic growth. And while the President has dithered as to whether to implement the trade agreement with Colombia, our trade competitors have been more than willing to enter into agreements with Colombia. Consequently, while Colombia's tariffs on U.S. imports have remained in place, Colombia's tariffs on products from other countries are falling away. For example, Colombia has implemented a preferential trade agreement with Argentina and Brazil. As a result, U.S. farm products are rapidly being displaced in the Colombian market by products from those countries. So it's not too surprising that between 2007 and 2010, U.S. agricultural exports to Colombia fell by more than half. And it looks like matters are going to get even worse. A Montana wheat grower who testified at yesterday's hearing noted that the U.S. share of Colombia's wheat market fell from 73% in 2008 to 43% in 2010. He also stated the following, or that following implementation of the Canada-Colombian Free Trade Agreement, which is expected to occur this year, U.S. exports of wheat to Colombia will drop to zero unless the United States implements its trade agreement with Colombia. So U.S. agricultural exports to Colombia are already falling. U.S. manufactured goods and U.S. services will be next. It doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to continue giving away the growing Colombian market to our competitors. If we want to boost our exports to Colombia, all we have to do is implement the U.S.-Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement. The Obama administration had earlier stated that it wanted to address Colombia's internal labor situation before moving ahead with the agreement. But the administration delayed taking any meaningful steps to address their concerns with the Colombia government for years. Just a few months ago, the administration finally got serious about engaging with Colombia. And lo and behold, in a matter of weeks, they were able to develop a labor action plan that addressed their concerns in a meaningful and concrete way. The administration discovered that, in their own words, they had a willing partner in Colombia. The fact of the matter is that Colombia has been taking steps for years to address issues related to violence against unionists and has always been willing to do more. Why it took the administration so long to figure it out is a mystery to me. So the Obama administration has now negotiated an action plan that addresses its concerns regarding the labor situation in Colombia. You would think we would have clarity that once the steps in the action plan are fulfilled, the administration would submit the agreement to Congress for its consideration. But we do not have this clarity. There has been no clear answer to this very simple question. Instead, there seems to be more preconditions on submitting the agreement that are not even related to the agreement itself, such as extension of trade adjustment assistance and permanent normal trade relations with Russia. Now, this is very odd. Most economists would agree that there are likely to be very few workers who will lose their jobs because of implementation of the Colombia Trade Agreement. After all, the U.S.-Colombia Trade Agreement will result in almost no growth in imports from Colombia. This is the case as almost all Colombian products have entered the United States duty-free over the past 2 decades on account of U.S. trade preference programs. In contrast, Colombia's average applied tariff on U.S. imports is over 12%, and they can reach as high as 388%. Moreover, the administration itself testified that implementation of the Colombia Agreement will expand exports of U.S. goods to Colombia by more than $1 billion. That's with a B. Increase U.S. GDP by $2.5 billion and support thousands of additional jobs for our workers at a time where we need jobs and where we need to pull this economy out of the mess it's in. So it's hard to see further extension of the TAA program as a necessary precondition for approval of an agreement that will help our economy and support jobs in the United States. It's a no-brainer. I'm also bewildered by any attempts to precondition submission of the Colombia Agreement to congressional support for permanent normal trade relations for Russia. These two issues are totally unrelated. Given the current disregard for the rule of law and the many trade problems that persist in Russia today, it is hard to argue that the time is ripe for Congress to grant Russia permanent normal trade relations. Moreover, it would be particularly ironic and sad to condition passage of the Colombia Trade Agreement with permanent normal trade relations for Russia. Over the past 4 years, Colombia has been a reliable U.S. trading partner, ready and willing to remove its tariffs on U.S. imports through implementation of our trade agreement. During these same years, Russia has seemingly gone out of its way on numerous occasions to prove to the United States that it is an unreliable trading partner. It is fundamentally unfair to continue to treat a friend and ally like Colombia in this ridiculous way. Unfortunately, it's not the first time Democratic leaders have put one of our closest Latin American allies in this position. The U.S.-Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement was first signed on November 22, 2006, almost 5 years ago. Democratic leaders refused to consider the agreement until their additional demands were met on labor, the environment, and intellectual property. The Bush administration responded by working with then-Speaker Pelosi on a package of changes that were understood would lead to consideration of the agreement. But once they had these changes in hand, the Democratic leadership in the House balked, citing yet more issues that had to be resolved. When President Bush submitted the Colombia Agreement to Congress for its consideration, utilizing Trade Promotion Authority procedures in April 2008, the Democratic leadership refused to allow the agreement to come up for a vote. Instead, they changed the rules, and the agreement has since languished for almost 5 years. Now, it's time for the excuses to end. Resolution of unrelated issues like trade adjustment assistance and PNTR for Russia should not be used as further barriers to submission of this agreement. Colombia is taking the steps laid out by the Obama administration that the administration has said are necessary before the President will formally submit the agreement to Congress. Once those steps are taken in June, I fully expect the administration to finally fulfill its end of the bargain and formally submit the agreement for congressional approval without further conditions. If not, the administration is making a conscious decision to continue denying U.S. exporters improved access to the Colombian market. and to undermine our standing as a credible ally in Latin America. Now, Madam President, it's a no-brainer to realize that Colombia is one of our best friends. When you compare it to some of its neighbors like Venezuela, and I can name other countries that are undermining our very country as we sit here and stand here, the fact of the matter is Colombia is a friend. Friends should not be treated this way. It's ridiculous what's going on. There's very little need for trade adjustment assistance in this particular deal. It's just another way of sucking the taxpayers more money for purposes that literally don't exist. And Madam President, I hope the administration will wake up and realize this is really this will really be a tremendous achievement for them. There's no reason in the world why they shouldn't want to do this. It'll be a sure creator of jobs at a time when we need jobs. It will even up a situation that up to this point has been sad, and it'll help our country. Let's quit playing games with this free trade agreement. Let's get it up, let's vote on it, and let's restore our relationship with Colombia to the great relationship that it deserves to be. Madam President, I suggest the absence of the quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.